Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are in the world.
I can hear you loud and clear. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. We are having difficulty hearing you.
It's 1300. Hi, I'm Kim Tobier Agnew. I am the Suicide Prevention Program Manager here for Joint Base Andrews. And so we're excited today to be able to meet to talk about creating resiliency plans. And so, as we know, Suicide Prevention Month is typically observed during the month of September. But one thing about the Air Force is that they've created a plan. So we actually have a plan that goes throughout the entire year where we look at each quarter of the year and focus on something different. And so today we have the opportunity to have a discussion about resiliency plans. But what we're going to start with is having Miss Tierra Fincher give us a discussion about what the Day of Hope stands for.
Good morning. Well, is it more? No, afternoon. Afternoon. This is such an honor, and it's just such an amazing time because Suicide Prevention Awareness Month is a time to raise awareness. And suicide is a leading cause of death in the United States. And suicide among service members, veterans, and their families is a public and national security crisis. But what we want to do here is to acknowledge that we are a family, to provide that day of hope here on Joint Base Andrews with all of us, to let everyone know that we are one. Again, my name is Tierra. I'm the moderator for today, and it's such an honor to be here and to be with you, Miss O'Reilly. And today we have the 459th Air Refueling Wing Director of Psychology Health, Rachel O'Reilly. And she's here to assist us, to walk us through and create a personal resilience plan. That is so important when it comes to suicide prevention and intervention. And the reason why this plan is so important is a personalized resilience plan is a fundamental tool which can be utilized to cope ahead with managing challenging, and I'm going to say that one more time, challenging emotions in response to inevitable life stressors. So we thank you so much for being here, Miss O'Reilly, and we're glad. We cannot wait to hear what you have to say, and we appreciate you. So if you would be so kind to take a moment and just give us that, to help us to create a resilience plan.
Yes, thank you so much for having me today. It's an honor.
Okay, so we're going to turn it over to you, Miss O'Reilly. I keep wanting to call you Dr. O'Reilly. I don't know if that's in your future, if it's happening, if you're working on it, but in my mind, I keep thinking Dr. O'Reilly. But ma'am, we're going to go ahead and give you the floor.
Thank you. All right, so my name is Rachel O'Reilly. I'm currently serving as the Director of Psychological Health for the 459 Air Refueling Wing, and I am a licensed clinical social worker. I'm also an Air Force veteran myself, and I'm now serving in a role as an Air Force civilian, and I'm coming from Department of Veterans Affairs most recently prior to transitioning into this role. And when serving within Department of Veterans Affairs, my focus was providing evidence-based treatment for trauma-related mental health disorders, as well as providing evidence-based treatment that have been newly rolled out for the first time within the past 2 years for providing interventions and treatment regarding suicide prevention. Before transitioning into this new role, the veterans that I worked with in treating had all been referred to my specific suicide prevention telehealth treatment program after engaging in suicidal behavior. And so what I had learned was evidence-based interventions as well as treatment for those who had engaged in suicidal behavior. Moving into this new role, the focus is not to provide treatment for those who have already engaged in behavior. The focus is now looking at early prevention. And so utilizing what's called the Advanced Safety Planning Intervention, which was a foundational tool for treatment for suicide prevention with those who have engaged in suicidal behavior. I have looked at taking the concepts informed by the Advanced Safety Planning Intervention and refocusing these concepts and tools to now be used for increasing our resilience and preventing engagement in harmful behaviors. And so what I'm going to walk us through today is what I now call creating your own personal resilience plan, or my resilience plan, which is a template informed by the Advanced Safety Planning Intervention. And so we are going to share a Word document of my resilience plan. It's a template that I encourage each of us to download and begin filling out as I walk us through the instructions. Additionally, there's a lot of information to go over today. So to be mindful of time, I do ask that if there are questions that come up, please put them in the chat, and also please put your contact information in there. We will do our best to try to field questions at the end of this instructional webinar. However, if we run out of time, I will plan to follow up in contact to answer questions offline. And if there are also any additional questions, my contact information will be provided to reach out to me afterwards. We don't want to prevent anybody from being able to ask questions and have those questions answered. So please know that even though we may run out of time during this presentation, I will be available to you afterwards. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and share the slides with you to be used in conjunction with the My Resilience Plan Word document template. Looking at the My Resilience Plan template, this is a step-by-step tool being utilized to increase our resilience and develop a step-by-step plan that can be used when we may be experiencing emotional crisis in the future. It is recommended to use this plan step by step after it's developed. However, it's important to know that if any time things are escalating very quickly and it may no longer be indicated to move through this plan step by step, at any time the emergency resources should be contacted. And in the beginning of the resilience plan, which is included on the template, are the different emergency numbers regarding medical or mental health emergency or information regarding an emotional crisis. So nationally, that number is 988. And if you are military or a veteran, then press 1 to speak with people that are specialized with military and veteran knowledge regarding de-escalation of emotional crisis. Moving into step 1. This step asks for you to think about the most recent time where you may have experienced a challenging emotional situation. There may be different stressors occurring for each of us in our lives, and it is helpful to think about how you experienced personally your most recent challenging situation. The reason for thinking about your own experience in a recent challenging situation is to review what your reactions and your experience was in that specific situation. And we're going to be thinking about the after action report for identifying what your own personal triggers, risk factors, and warning signs are. One of the reasons it's important to identify this after a crisis and while not currently in crisis is that when we are experiencing challenging emotions or reacting to difficult stressors in our lives, what occurs is the part of our brain that is responsible for our survival, referred to as the amygdala, often thought of as what may be responsible for flight, fight, freeze responses, becomes activated when we experience different stressful situations. And when the amygdala becomes activated, our executive functioning goes offline. Our executive functioning in our prefrontal cortex helps us problem solve and critically think. Now, when we are experiencing very heightened emotions and an escalation of challenging emotions, it is very difficult for us to engage in effective thinking and problem solving skills. So going through this after action report helps us to identify how to recognize when you may be beginning to experience a challenging situation, to notice this within yourself, and then utilize tools to de-escalate prior to the potential of acting on harmful behaviors. So looking at the after action report of your own challenging situation, it's recommended to think about during that situation, what was going on in your external environment that may be referred to as a trigger. So something that happened that you then experienced a reaction to. Many external triggers that people I've worked with have reported may be conflict with significant others or people that they care about, that they interact with on a daily basis. This could be coworkers, family, friends, partners. So that tends to be a common external trigger. There may also be loud noises that people experience heightened reactions to. And so that would be some common external triggers. So now it's recommended to think about what that was for you. And if you can, just write a few words and document that for yourself. Now, if you think about during that situation or leading up to perhaps the height of the challenging situation, what may have been your own thoughts that you were experiencing leading up to and during that time? Additionally, we tend to experience intensified emotions. People tend to report experiencing heightened anxiety, potential anger, frustration, irritability, sadness, at times hopelessness. And this varies for each individual. So that's why it's important to check in with yourself and think about your own personal after action report and make note of that. Additionally, when we're experiencing these challenging emotions that have been intensified, many of us also experience physical sensations at the same time. And what is commonly reported is tightness in the chest, fast racing heart, sometimes muscles tightening up, and sometimes tension headaches. Now, this isn't encompassing everybody's experience. However, these are common experiences that many report. Now, lastly, thinking about what may be behaviors that tend to indicate that things may be escalating. Typical behaviors tend to be reported as avoidance of perhaps social situations, avoidance of what people may describe as their external triggers, avoidance of experiencing difficult emotions. It also may be engaging in sometimes increased alcohol intake, increased difficulty breathing, taking in enough oxygen, and these behaviors vary for each of us as individuals. Now, after we identify what our own personal triggers, risk factors, and warning signs are, what do we then do with that? So we're going to move into step 2. And step 2 involves what can we do first as our own internal coping strategies without involving others. So how can we first regulate on our own without involving others? Now, this can vary about what people do as their own coping skills. And it's helpful to think about what are the coping skills that we already know and have and are most accessible to us no matter where we are. Typically, a recommended first coping skill will be to engage in mindfully taking in deeper breaths and getting in more oxygen, which tends to help reduce potential anxiety we may be experiencing and be able to de-escalate and think more clearly. Additionally, I've spoken with the people in the 459th Air Refueling Wing about my own personal coping skill, which is a go-to for me, is to play my own resilience anthem. And my resilience anthem is the 5 Stair Steps song, Ooh Child. And when I hear that song, it immediately helps me feel supported and to de-escalate when feeling anxiety or frustration. And I'll just play a little snippet of what that sounds like. So I'll ask for you to think about if music is something you connect with, what may be your own personal go-to resilience anthem? And it's important to think about what helps you feel like you have a positive mood or to help calm down and de-escalate. While you may have a diverse variety of music that you like, it's important to be mindful about the intention of what your resilience anthem is seeking to accomplish. So we may not want to listen to something that may be very angry and continue to escalate our anger and frustration. That's not what the intention of the resilience anthem is meant to do. So if anybody can think of their own resilience anthem, and if you'd like to share, please feel free to put that in the chat, but no pressure. And it's recommended to have at least 3 internal coping strategies. However, there's no correct number necessarily, but helpful to just have more than one, so there's not a single point of failure. So this, I've seen it go up to 10. I've seen it perhaps only be 2. And so it's helpful to think about what you already know, what's a go-to, what's accessible for you without many barriers, and then to practice engaging in those coping strategies and figure out what works and what doesn't for yourself, and then adjust your template accordingly. So keep that updated. Now moving into step 3, once we've attempted to manage our emotions and de-escalate on our own first without involving others, this may or may not be enough. And if it feels like it will be helpful to contact others and reach out for support, step 3 involves thinking about who may be your social contacts who may serve as a helpful distraction. And it's important to differentiate that these contacts are not necessarily people that you disclose you're in distress to. It's more so people that you can contact and they help to change your focus. So the example that I use on my own resilience plan is that I tend to contact my friend Janet because she's also an Air Force veteran and she's also a social worker. And I could disclose if I'm in distress to her, but I also don't have to. And I contact her because she is from Monroe, Louisiana, and she is a storyteller. And she likes to tell these hilarious stories, especially about people in the Duck Dynasty that she grew up with. And it just makes me laugh so much. And I don't really have to talk much about myself to be able to engage in that healthy distraction of the stories that my friend Janet tells. And so it's really important to think about and not to think about who may serve as that healthy distraction without the barrier of feeling comfortable disclosing distress to them or not. Additionally, it's helpful to think about, if possible, having at least 2 people listed as helpful distractions. When possible, it's helpful to not just have one single point of failure. Let's say one person isn't available. It's helpful to have at least a second option when possible. It's also helpful to think about if there are public places or, let's say, social organizations that you may be able to go to also serve as a healthy distraction, and perhaps not engage in isolation if what we need is to really connect with others and move our attention elsewhere. Now, moving into step 4, this involves who may be family members or friends who you may feel comfortable disclosing you're in distress to and asking for help. Now, this is not an expectation that everybody has people in their lives that they feel comfortable disclosing distress to. However, if you do, again, it's helpful when possible to put at least 2 people. And I will say that in working with people, it is more common than not that there does tend to be a stigma about disclosing distress, and there does tend to be barriers for people choosing that they feel comfortable doing this. So this is a very personal decision about if you do feel comfortable or not disclosing to people in your social support system. Moving into step 5. Now this includes professionals and helping agencies that can be contacted if you are engaging in the steps, attempting to de-escalate challenging emotions. However, having a lot of difficulty de-escalating and things are continuing to become more challenging for you. Some people do have professional agencies and support systems already established. And if that's true, then it's important to put those names and numbers into your own template in the order that you would contact. Now, for our wing, I'm the director of psychological health. And so I've included my contact information on the professional contacts. And so when I hand out these templates during outreach events, my information is already there. And hopefully people will feel comfortable contacting me. Now, perhaps people may already be engaged with or doing treatment with a mental health provider. Then they should put that person perhaps first as who they would contact in case of emotional crisis. Now, other people that could be included would be primary care providers, case managers, non-medical counseling services such as the military family life counselor or consultant. The MFLEC for our wing is Sydney Ford, and she is an excellent support to our wing and our service members. And so many of our service members will also put the MFLEX number on here. Now, let's say there may not be a treatment team already established. The point of this resilience plan is to de-escalate when we're starting to really get spun up quickly. And so in that case, there is always the 988 number. Again, press 1 for military or veteran. There's different ways of contacting 988, which is the National Crisis Lifeline, Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. And I'd like to speak to this being that there's a lot of different names for the Crisis Lifeline, and it can be confusing. But since July of last year, the different 800 numbers that can be referred to as the Military Crisis Line, Veterans Crisis Line, National Crisis Lifeline, they are all the same source, and it's all changed to 988. And the only difference would be to press 1 if you are military or veteran. So just remember, while there's a lot of different ways of referring to this service, it is all the same service, 988, press 1 if military or veteran. All right. And again, if there is a medical or mental health emergency, perhaps not just an emotional crisis that's escalating, 911 is always available to you, or your local law enforcement if you are, let's say, on a military installation, whether CONUS or OCONUS. So I've provided perhaps too much information about different resources to contact depending on what your specific situation may be. And this can always be modified based on what your situation is. Perhaps you're about to deploy. It can be helpful to research what those resources will specifically be before you actually get to where you're going to be prepared. Now, it's also important to look at, when not in crisis, what would be your preference in going to either urgent care or an emergency department? When looking at this, I like to look at distance proximity and also reducing costs, because depending on what type of medical care a person is going to engage in, there may be ways to reduce costs. For example, if a person is a veteran and they're able to be in close enough proximity to going to Department of Veterans Affairs hospital, that can help reduce cost potentially versus going to and coordinating on the back end a private hospital. Now, this varies for everyone's different situation, but it's helpful to think about ahead of time when not in crisis to reduce costs and get appropriate care when possible. Next, we're moving into step 6, which is working to make your environment safer. Now, when we are starting to escalate an emotional crisis, it's very important to think about how to put time and distance in between yourself and potentially lethal means. So I have provided a list of recommendations on how to do that regarding discarding excess medications, reducing ease of access to sharp objects, pools of water, rope, avoiding operating a vehicle if possible when experiencing an emotional crisis, and if applicable, utilizing gun locks, which if you don't have one, and it would be helpful to have one, I have a supply. Our First Sergeant, the Resiliency Integrator, First Sergeant Alicia Lofton has a large supply. Miss Poyer Agnew has a large supply. And so if it will be helpful and you need access to those resources, please contact me and I can help facilitate that for you. And our Resiliency Integrator is the First Sergeant for our wing, and that's Master Sergeant Alicia Lofton. And she has a large supply. All right. And so now we're also looking at what may be other supportive resources that can help provide additional coping skills or supportive resources. So I've included digital tools to, for example, the Virtual Hope Box is a free app that is widely utilized within Department of Veterans Affairs to help inspire hope. There is an electronic version of the safety plan available online or within the PTSD Coach app. And I do recommend to check out the free PTSD Coach app if possible. And this doesn't mean that you're necessarily diagnosed with PTSD. However, there are very helpful coping tools that are guided within the PTSD Coach app, as well as a place to store your resilience plan in that app. Additionally, members of our wing are able to access an electronic version of the resiliency plan through our wing's SharePoint under the Psychological Health Library, and that helps reduce barriers to accessing the resilience plan so that members can go onto that website and download it themselves. If they do not feel comfortable, let's say, contacting me or speaking to other helping professionals to gain access to creating their own resilience plan. And that is one of the ways that we are reducing stigma and reducing barriers to accessing helpful suicide prevention tools, resources, and skills. There's also the Breathe to Relax app, which is a free app developed by Defense Health Agency, as well as the free Mindfulness Coach app. So I do recommend checking out these supportive resources that are all free. And then we're looking at bonus. Step 7, it's helpful to think about what your personal reasons are for being resilient. And that can vary for each of us. So I'm being mindful of the time here. We're going to wrap it up. And I will be reviewing questions and getting back to each of you if you've left your contact information. Thank you so much for your time today. And please do remember to be resilient and finish creating your resilience plan. Have a great day.